I am going to be doing a drawing from this photograph that we took of the dog. I put it in a clear envelope here that is marked. Let me just pull it out a little bit so you can sort of see that it's marked in quadrants, 4 each way. This is an 11.5 by 8.25 sheet of paper. And I'm going to enlarge it up to a 12 by 16. So I've marked on my page where my 12 by 16 is here, and then setting this in the corner of this, right at the corner of that, I can check my diagonal and see how close I'm going to be to being correct in the proportions. So if this diagonal, I just got to get right on this edge, because if I'm off a little bit, it can get off a whole lot going the other way. So running a diagonal through this, right through those two corners, this comes out to actually being just a little bit below that. Just a little bit below that. And I actually want to give just a little tiny bit more on the top and bottom of this guy. So I'm just saying that it's close enough. Yeah, that it's close enough. And so I've made the 4 here and 4 there for my proportions. And now I can take this and line up where these intersect here, what is in the image at that point, and how far from edges is it. So let's start with his nose. So his nose should be second box over, and here's the top of his nose. It's a little more than 2/3 wide, and maybe a little bit more there. And then it's a little over halfway up that box to the top of his head. And then these come down slightly. And the ears are not quite halfway over, so about there and down. It's about 1/3. So 1, 2, right there. That's the turn of his ear. And then this comes very close in here. So that's that part of that. It's about thirds, so 1 about thirds. That overlaps just a little there. And then this foot sits right in on here almost. And this is above that line. Now his foot down here, this is maybe an 1/8. This is a little more on this side. And when we come up into here, some of that is below that. We've got a nice little buckle here. There's a ring that sits out. Oh, that's inside of this line, not on the other side of it. And just a little inside of there, you can see the other part of this. Okay, now his chin, it's a little less than half. So if half is here, a little less than half is about here. So here's chin, and cheeks go a little wider than that nose. Do I have the nose too wide? I think I do. Okay. lose that gestural feel of it. And so doing that first, then I've got a sort of a basic feeling for what I need to do here, and I can make some little corrections if I need to. We'll have to think a little tiny bit because of the way the photograph is taken. His head is probably bigger than what it really looked like. And yeah, this is going to come up just a wee touch higher here, and his ears with it. If you have a camera lens that is very slightly wide angle, which I think this was when I took it, it's going to make his head look a little bigger than it should. And let's see, if I run a line directly above this, okay, directly above this is a little bit short of his eye, so his eye doesn't come quite there. And his eyes are fairly open. And almost round feeling. And then this one, if I run a straight line, that one's going to come right to the edge of his eye on that side. And whoops, those eyes are still going to be inside of this. Ooh, I have that nose over too far still. And then these eyes, let's see, is there a tilt to this? Maybe very, very slightly. Do I have that eye too high? If you don't get them in there, it looks totally wrong. If you get them in there too strong, it's totally wrong. So it's this very balance between correct and problem children. So then it's going to be darker in here. It's dark across through here. It's a little darker there. Much darker underneath. So it's going to be darker. And jowls come back into here. A little bit, yeah, okay, I've got that one showing. And there's some lines that you can sort of see back in here. This is going to be, and should that, no, we're going all the way up to that white, so no, that does not go any higher up there. Okay, and the eyes are going to be such an important part of this painting because he's got this wonderful, come on, let's go play look on his face that we're really going to want to try and capture. And so that's going to be something important, and it's the amount that the eyes are open is a good portion of it, but also this sort of little half smile that's happening down in his jaw down here. And you can almost see that tail wiggling, speaking of which we don't have it in here. And I think it's actually a soft, he probably was wagging his tail because the focus is very soft in on there. Okay, so I've got the basic here, and the next thing is going to be to find those shadows and where the light and dark patterns are so that those all end up being proper. And no, we can't see that foot at all, so we can only see 3 feet. This goes back into here just a wee touch. He's actually got and then the other thing we have to be aware of is where is that light coming from? And I'm seeing highlights on the top of his head. I'm seeing highlights on the top of that tail. I'm seeing highlights on his nose. But he's relatively dark in front here. So I'm saying that the sun is coming from almost overhead, but a little bit behind him. So sun is coming down in here that way. So we'll just write sun. Okay. I showed you the process of getting the rough dog onto the page. I decided I wanted to go through and actually put the shading on this, because a lot of what's going to happen with this little guy, being able to get the form of this dog, we're really going to have to be looking at how the light and dark patterns, the gradations of light and dark, create the form shadowing that makes him look like a three-dimensional object, three-dimensional dog. And so this, I really wanted to tell myself where those were, because it's going to be so important to see that when I go to do the final thing. This isn't perfect. There's things that I would do differently here if I were spending a lot of time doing a finished drawing, but I wanted to do a rough, get the basic things down, tell myself where most everything was, where it's darker underneath of his belly, darker in front of his feet, where there's light coming in from up above, where there's light on top of his head, how that face is shaped by how the light and dark patterns are formed. So I will use this as my drawing to do the graphite transfer onto my watercolor paper, and so we'll set that up, and then from there we can start painting. So I now have the drawing on the page ready to go. I'm always umming here. Like we did with the little sketch, I'm going to now need to go in and find the light and dark patterns in the dog. And so I did the drawing first to get the feeling of where those light and dark patterns were going to be, so that when I go to do this, it's going to be a little bit easier. And so I'm going to do this in a couple of layers, starting with the lightest layers. I could do it a few pieces at a time, or I can pretty much put a layer over most of the dog and then come back and start building it up, which is what I think I will do. And the eyes I'm going to do separately, so don't worry about the fact that they're going to look like ghost eyes to start with, because that's going to be a tricky little thing. The face is always a worrisome piece for me, because to get this feeling of what this animal looks like, I'm going to need to get that face pretty accurate, which, looking at this, I see a little bit of erasing that I better do on his nose before we start, so these pencil lines don't show later. So let me just get a little bit of that cleaned up. And yeah, those are going to be dark there anyway, so that doesn't really matter. Make that just a little bit lighter. I had come in, after I did my tracing, I had come in and done a little bit of darkening on some of my lines so that I knew where they were. And I see this one is not accurate, so let's just take it off. It needs to go out just a little tiny bit, because if his nose, either that or the nose isn't accurate. Oh, I hate this one. I start to do something and then I go, oh, maybe I better do a little changing. Okay, and then this comes off of the nose and out a little down here and down to the base of there. That's better. Okay, I think that'll be good enough. And are those eyes round enough? Maybe they need to go up just a wee touch there. Up just a wee touch here. His eyes are surprisingly roundish in that shape that's going on with them. Okay, let's see if we can dive in on this. This one is slightly scary. Let me start with we'll go with this big of a brush. Keep my rag close by and build up a brown. Now let's see. I've got some blue in my pan here. This was phthalo blue. I'm going to use that with my burnt sienna. See if that's right to get anywhere close to his, it's sort of almost a grayish brown in his body. More burnt sienna in there. Going to be close. Sure, it's going to be close. And then it's a little more yellowish as it goes up onto his head. So his nose is a little more this grayish brown, and then it becomes a little more yellowish as it goes off into the outer edges. So let me just mix a little more. Actually, this was a yellow here. Mix some of that with the yellow. What color is my pan left from another painting? I always like to leave the colors in here until the point when I need to actually remove them, because they're very useful at later points. Okay, so let's start. Now, okay, it's pretty light around the edges of his eyes, so I'm actually leave, and that's too gray. Too gray. Let's just get a little more burnt sienna put into there. And let's just thin this a little more up here. If I get it too dark too early, then I have to fight with it later, and I don't want to do that. It's quite light across the top of his nose and up into there. It's quite light across. Just careful where my head is. It's going to get underneath of that camera before I know it. So it's a little paler in these two sides of his muzzle, and then it's going to be darker right in front. And he's got a little gray, she, it's a she. I'm pretty sure this dog was a she. It's going to go darker in there, but that's okay. This brush is really quite wet, so it's full of paint. And let's see, this has to go up in a little bit of a circle here. There we go, a little bit of a circle. And then that's a little lighter there. So let's just dry the brush some and pick that off. And same with this, pick this off. So I'm not going anywhere near as dark as it's going to be in the end, but I want it dark enough that I can see where my light and dark areas are going to be. There's a little lightness right around the edge of that. And let's see, we can go a little darker right in. Is darker on that side. But there's some little light spaces to it, so I want to try and leave those, and I can always come back in and lift a little bit here. And I don't like this hard line, so I need to soften that, and I can come out and do a little dry brush texture there, which is just great. And his little jawline is a little bit darker there. Okay. And there's a little lightness on the edge of that ear next to his face, so that can just stay white for now. I might have to lift the other side over there, but I'm going to be going quite a bit darker, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. Just sort of working my way down. Now as we get down into here, he starts turning a little bit more of a reddish brown. So I'm adding that mixture that I had that had the a little bit of the yellow in it, or almost straight. Almost straight. It's still going to get dark later, but I can start with this little lighter color in underneath of there. Now his collar is red, so it's a different color, so I'm going to leave it white for now and come back and pick that up later. So I'm just going to paint around all the collar bits. There's a little ring right there, and then the buckle is there. So I'm working with a fairly big brush. It's pretty cool this morning, so I can Let's see, this is still wet enough. I can bring that over a little bit. And this one's dark. Oh. I want to put my thumb down, but I can't because it's wet there. And okay, this is going to go a little bit darker. Let's just go ahead and make it a little bit darker right now. And then I need to dry the brush almost completely and soften this edge. And make sure that that doesn't go weird. It's one of these things that the more you do, the more you've got to do. And then it's like, maybe I shouldn't have come up into here at all. Yeah, okay, just let that be a little bit of dry brush. This is a little too much contrast in here right now, but that can all get fixed. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. That's all going to go darker. I'm just sort of doing this a little bit dry brushy in there. In some ways I shouldn't even be in here working on this part of it. Okay, let's continue on down here. Because really what we're trying to do at this point is to establish the, and we were using phthalo blue with this, so let me just continue with phthalo blue. One reason to use phthalo blue at this point is that it's a staining color rather than a granulating color. And so it's not going to pick up little pieces of granulation when I go to put the next layer in on top of here. Be sure I don't get this too dark on that edge of his leg. And I like what happens with these two colors mixing together and then breaking apart a little bit. It makes for some interesting combinations. I'm going to leave a little bit of light down on his toes because his feet down there, his toes have a little bit of highlight on them. His toenails do, not his toes, the toenails. And that's going to be quite dark in underneath of here. And I'm trying to follow my brush marks to follow his fur. Now he's actually got a little, and I don't want to make too much of an emphasis of it, but there is a little cowlick right here where those legs join in, which is sort of interesting, but maybe it's not important because if we make it too strong, the eye's going to go right to it, and that isn't where I want your eye to go. I want your eye to go to his face. Let's get this little extra off of there because that will bleed back up into everything else. So it's lighter across the top of his foot. Just let that be lighter. This is darker right here, so let me add a little bit more right into that part of there. Darker underneath of here. Now I might need to see that he turns a little more yellowy back in there. Let me just add a little more yellow into this mixture. Okay, so I'm just established a little bit of slightly darker areas without going really dark. So we can put a little bit more darkness. I just put a little bit more of the phthalo blue into my brown to make this a little bit darker. And let's see, that wraps through there, this wraps through here. It's all darker behind that leg, and it's pretty dark underneath of his belly. And And once again, see, this all becomes sort of this little more gray-brown in underneath of here. So we're getting close to needing to stop on this unless I want to continue developing some of these spaces. And here, let's take a little bit off of my brush. Oh, that was a little damper there, so okay. And that's darker and underneath of there. Take it, oops. When it's wet and wet like this, it's always a little tricky to move it around, and I've got a big brush, so that's making it even more so. Go a little bit darker right here. You can see some of his muscles. I'm at the point where I think I better stop because I'm just going to make this messy if I don't. So, Margaret, go ahead and stop. So I put that first layer in underneath. See, I didn't stop. I never do I? There's always something else that I go, oh, I could actually work on that. And I'm going to just sort of dry brush through here. This is going to create some texture when it shows through on the next layer. That's going to be a little bit darker right there. Let's just dry brush that. I'm having more success getting it sort of down with a little dry brush than I am. Okay, I think I've gone this as far as I want to at this point. Under near, he's got a little bit of a jowl hanging down on, a little jowl hanging down either side of his mouth there, and that wasn't evident in what I had just painted with those outlines. There's a little inward mark right here. So I don't know how accurate this dog is going to be compared to its photograph, but okay, so I'm going to stop here. So now I've got my first layer in underneath of here, and then the next part of this is going to be then to develop all of this into a more complete painting. He's going to have a little bit of shadow underneath of him here. It's going to have a little shadow here and a little shadow in underneath of there. So I guess those are important things to know about. So let's just sort of put some of that down to get a feel for where that's going to be. I'm going to have that background pretty amorphous. I don't think I'm going to put any of those striped dock boards in there. I think it's going to end up being just sort of a plain background of some sort. So I will stop here. We've done the drawing, we've done the sketch on here, now we've done the first layer.